For 60 years, archaeology textbooks said the same thing. Humans arrived in the Americas around 13,000 years ago, crossing a land bridge from Asia, and that was the beginning of human history on two entire continents. That consensus is now collapsing, and the evidence replacing it is not fringe speculation from outsiders. It is peer-reviewed data from footprints, bone pendants, ancient DNA, and dated sediment coming out of sites across North and South America that keep returning dates of 20,000, 25,000, and in some cases 30,000 years before the present. The most secure single piece of evidence, fossilized human footprints in New Mexico, places human beings in the middle of North America during the last glacial maximum, a period when the conventional model says the ice sheets should have made that completely impossible. In this video, we are going to go through each line of evidence, what it actually says, why mainstream archaeology resisted it for so long, and what a radically earlier arrival date means for everything we thought we understood about who the first Americans were and where they actually came from. To understand why this matters so much, you first need to understand what the old model was and why it held for as long as it did. The Clovis first model, named after a distinctive style of fluted stone projectile point first found near Clovis, New Mexico in the 1930s, held that the earliest recognizable human culture in the Americas appeared around 13,000 years ago, that it spread rapidly across both continents from a founding population that crossed the Bering Land Bridge from northeastern Asia, and that any claimed site older than Clovis was either misdated, contaminated, or misidentified. That model shaped which sites were considered worth excavating, which funding proposals were approved, and which researchers were taken seriously for 60 years. And it created a self-reinforcing orthodoxy that made it genuinely difficult to publish pre-Clovis findings in major journals even when the evidence was solid. The first major crack in the model came not from a new discovery, but from a reanalysis of an old one. Bluefish Caves in the Yukon territory of Canada was first excavated in the 1970s and 1980s by archaeologist Jack Cinquemars, who recovered mammoth and horse bones with cut marks consistent with stone tool processing, and proposed dates that pushed human occupation back well beyond the Clovis window. The archaeological establishment largely dismissed his findings during his lifetime, and Cinquemars spent decades being marginalized within the field for a claim that a 2017 peer-reviewed reanalysis subsequently confirmed. That 2017 study, applying modern radiocarbon techniques to the original lithic material from Bluefish Caves, returned a date of approximately 24,000 calibrated years before present, roughly 10,000 years older than the previous consensus for the earliest secure North American archaeological site. Bluefish Caves is now the oldest confirmed archaeological site in North America, and the man who first excavated it spent most of his career being told he was wrong. But Bluefish Caves was only the beginning of what has accumulated since then. Monte Verde in south-central Chile, repeatedly excavated since the late 1970s under archaeologist Tom Dillihay, has produced radiocarbon dates for its most securely documented layer, Monte Verde Roman II, of around 14,500 calibrated years before present. That date alone was already a problem for the Clovis first model, because it places people at the southern tip of South America before, or at the same time as, the supposed first arrival in North America, which geographically makes no sense if the Bering Land Bridge crossing was the only entry point. You cannot be in Chile at the same time you are supposedly just arriving in Alaska, unless you took a different route or arrived much earlier. Monte Verde was the central case for the pre-Clovis argument for decades, and it remained bitterly contested until the weight of additional evidence from multiple independent sites made the resistance increasingly difficult to sustain. Then came White Sands, and White Sands changed everything. In 2009, a set of fossilized human footprints was discovered preserved in fine gypsum sand at White Sands National Park in New Mexico. The footprints were embedded between layers of aquatic plant sediment, material that had accumulated in a shallow lake bed and could be directly radiocarbon dated. The initial dating study, published in 2021, placed the footprints between 21,000 and 23,000 years before present, squarely within the last glacial maximum, the period of maximum ice sheet extent during the last ice age. This was immediately significant for one specific reason. The conventional model of how humans entered the Americas depends on the ice corridor, a gap that opened between the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets as they retreated, allowing passage from Alaska into the interior of North America. That corridor did not open until approximately 13,000 to 14,000 years ago, which is precisely why the Clovis first model placed first arrival at that date. If humans were standing in New Mexico 21,000 years ago, they were there 8,000 years before the ice corridor existed, meaning either the corridor model is wrong, or there was a completely different route into the Americas that the conventional model had not accounted for. Critics immediately challenged the White Sands dating, arguing that the aquatic plant seeds used for the radiocarbon measurements could have absorbed older carbon from the lake environment, a phenomenon called the reservoir effect, making the dates appear older than they actually were. It was a serious methodological objection, and it slowed acceptance of the findings significantly. Then in 2023, a follow-up study addressed the criticism directly, using pollen DNA extracted from within the footprint layer itself, a completely independent dating material that is not subject to the reservoir effect, and confirmed the original chronology. The lead investigator, Matthew Bennett of Bournemouth University, and his team had now produced two independent lines of dating evidence pointing to the same window: human beings in New Mexico between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago. The White Sands footprints are now widely regarded across the field as the most secure evidence for human presence in North America at or before 21,000 years ago, and the associated megafauna footprints found at the same site, giant ground sloth, mammoth, and dire wolf tracks preserved in the same sediment layers, confirm that these humans were sharing the landscape with the megafauna they are supposed to have helped drive to extinction thousands of years later. But the evidence does not stop in North America. In 2023, an independent line of findings emerged from Santa Helena Cave in central Brazil, and what came out of that cave pushed the implications even further. A collaboration of Brazilian, French, and American researchers reported on stone tools and modified bone pieces recovered in secure, undisturbed stratigraphic contexts inside the cave. The radiocarbon dates placed the assemblage at 25,000 to 27,000 years before present, and the bone pieces were not just tools. They were interpreted by the researchers as deliberately perforated pendants, objects designed to be worn as body ornamentation. That interpretation matters enormously because deliberate body ornamentation is a behavioral marker. It signals fully modern human cognitive capacity, the kind of symbolic thinking associated with Homo sapiens rather than any earlier hominin form. People making jewelry in Brazil 25,000 to 27,000 years ago are not a marginal early population clinging to existence. They are behaviorally modern humans with established material culture, living on a continent they presumably did not just arrive on. Some of the bone evidence from Santa Helena also shows impact marks and processing patterns consistent with human butchery of giant ground sloth, an implication that was, until very recently, considered essentially impossible on both behavioral and environmental grounds for humans at that date in South America. The 2023 Santa Helena paper has been heavily cited precisely because it combines three independently significant findings: early dates, body ornamentation, and megafauna interaction, in a single secure stratigraphic context. Now add the genetic evidence, because the DNA picture is beginning to catch up with the archaeology. Large-scale analyses of Native American genomes, including major studies published in 2024, examining the genetics of both modern and ancient native populations across North and South America, support a model in which the founding American population derived from East Asian ancestors who split from their source population roughly 25,000 to 30,000 years ago. In the genetic model, this founding population then spent a significant period of isolation in the Beringia region, the land mass that connected northeastern Asia to Alaska, before splitting into multiple branches and entering the Americas proper. The implied branching times in the genetic data are broadly consistent with the archaeological dates, now being returned from Bluefish caves, White Sands, and Santa Elena, suggesting that the founding population was genetically distinct and geographically isolated long before the Clovis window. Earlier genetic consensus had placed the entry into the Americas after the last glacial maximum, in line with the Clovis first model. But the most recent publications are pushing implied split dates earlier in ways that are narrowing the gap between what the genes say and what the archaeology is finding in the ground. The disagreement between the genetic and archaeological lines of evidence is not yet fully resolved, and the field acknowledges this openly. But the direction of travel in both lines is toward earlier dates, not later ones. So if humans were in New Mexico 21,000 years ago and in Brazil 25,000 to 27,000 years ago, how did they get there? The ice corridor was closed. The Bering Land Bridge crossing, followed by an overland route through interior North America, is geographically impossible at those dates, given what the ice sheets were doing. The answer that an increasing number of researchers are converging on is a coastal route, boats or watercraft of some kind, hugging the ice-free Pacific coastline from northeastern Asia down the western coast of North America, bypassing the interior ice sheets entirely. The genetic, archaeological, and oceanographic evidence supporting the coastal model is actively being built right now, and while it is not yet universally accepted, it is the only model that makes geographic sense if the early dates are real. The implications of all of this for American prehistory are genuinely sweeping. If humans were in the Americas 25,000 to 30,000 years ago, the Clovis culture, long treated as the founding moment of human history on two continents, may not be the first culture at all, but rather one of multiple cultures in a long and complex continental occupation, its geographic signatures reflecting population dynamics rather than first arrival. The entire framework for understanding who the first Americans were, where they came from, how long they had been there, and what their relationship was to the megafauna extinctions would need to be substantially rewritten. And there is one more implication that historians of indigenous culture have noted with particular interest. Indigenous American oral traditions that describe deep, ancient, continuous occupation of the continent. Traditions that mainstream archaeology spent decades treating as incompatible with the 13,000-year timeline, would, in the light of a 25,000 to 30,000-year arrival date, gain a level of empirical support that no one in the field expected to have to take seriously. The story of the first Americans is being rewritten right now, in real time, by footprints in desert sand and bone pendants in Brazilian caves. And the rewrite is not finished yet. If this changed how you think about what we actually know versus what we assumed we knew about ancient human history, there is another video that follows a similar pattern. A set of historical claims that critics dismissed for 2 centuries, until physical evidence came out of the ground and forced the experts to reconsider every objection they had made.